Hello! Today I would like to talk a little bit about life drawing. I want to talk about some of the misconceptions that I see time and time again, as well as my own view on why life drawing is something that's immensely valuable and something that you should probably be engaging with if you're not already. So, first off, we should probably try and define life drawing as a term and the practices that it refers to. And I want to split it into two separate components in order to do that, which are life and drawing, if you didn't guess already. It might seem like a bit of a trivial thing to put so much emphasis on, but I feel as though some of people's issues with life drawing stem from a misunderstanding of exactly what life drawing kind of is in the first place. Let's try and tackle drawing first. The idea most people get when they think of drawing is producing an image using lines. The Google definition even specifies the kind of tools that are used, whether that's pencil, pen, or crayon. Interestingly enough, it doesn't include paint. Now, as artists, I think that kind of a definition is too simple and too restrictive. Drawing has to become something more broad and ultimately more important. It's going to encompass proportion, perspective, shape design. A good drawing can even suggest value, edges, colour. I can use painting and shape and brush marks to demonstrate all of those things. You know, I can show off proportion just by making a limb out of a brush mark. I can demonstrate perspective even using atmosphere and colour in an image, not necessarily using line. In an interview with Age of Empires, Craig Mullins described drawing as the organisation and expression of relationships. Let's just think about that for a moment. What exactly might Craigie mean? Well, all art is going to be comprised of relationships, whether that's relationships between objects, between shadow and light, between people, between concepts. Arranging elements within an image to express a specific relationship optimally is going to be the goal of a good drawing. Now, when we use this wider definition of drawing, we can see that it doesn't so much rely on any individual tool. You can observe a scene and begin to arrange elements of that scene within your own head. You can make comparisons between shapes, values, and colours before you've even considered opening up your sketchbook. That is drawing. Life, on the other hand, refers to the subject that we are looking at and observing and studying. It's important to note that life and living are separate. Life drawing does not necessarily require a living model. It just requires you to observe something from life, and that's to say with your own eyes, not through a computer monitor or the lens of a camera or anything like that. Now, it could be a nude model, but it could also just be a plant, a skull, a jar of pickles. I've got a can of Fanta on my desk and a mug. I've got a pencil case here. As long as I'm observing all of these subjects with my own eyes as they are in front of me, as opposed to a photograph, I'm observing them from life. Now that we've defined exactly what life drawing is or can be, let's discuss why you should do it and how it's going to benefit you as an artist. So you can see here that I've got this skull painting running in the background, and I chose this as a specific subject because of the things that I could potentially learn from it and things that I could observe from life that a photograph might not necessarily cope so well with. So the first of those things is exposure. If you get your phone camera and you try and take an image of something, your phone will try to expose for either light or shadow. This is true with most cameras. Yes, you can overlay them and try and get some kind of high dynamic range, but it's a big hassle, and most of the references you're going to find on Pinterest, etc., are exposing for light or shadow. What that means is if I expose for light, I'm going to get lots more information in the light, but my shadows are going to have compressed information, a compressed value range. Alternatively, if I expose for shadow, I might begin to see all of that information in the shadow, but the lights are going to be blown out. They're going to be way too bright. I'll include examples of this in the video, but I'm sure you'll be familiar with a blown out photograph or a photograph that's underexposed and the shadows are too dark. Now, on the other hand, your eyes are a very, very sophisticated camera of sorts, in the sense that they can expose for both light and shadow at the same time, or at least they can switch between multiple exposures quickly enough that you wouldn't notice. I'm sure all of you at some point in your lives have been in a room and it's been nighttime and you've turned the light off and all of a sudden it's pitch black, but then pretty quickly, within a few seconds, your eyes will adjust, right? Your pupils will open up to let more light in, and you'll begin to see information within that room. This is something that a camera would really, really, really struggle with, but that we can see and observe fine. This skull in the background, I deliberately put on a very, very sunny windowsill, on a very, very sunny morning. So you had all of this light streaming in. If I took a photo of it, it would be completely blown out, right? The skull would basically be a giant white bloom. But actually using my own eyes, I can see a lot more of the color and value in the shadow and the lit side at the same time, which is why it's so useful to observe. You could argue that that kind of exposure for light or shadow is actually quite helpful because it groups shapes. But that should be something that you're doing, right? That should be your decision, rather than just a result of the limitation of the technology that you're using, or a limitation of your own understanding of the thing that's in front of you, right? Next up is form. Now, this is kind of the biggest point, really. Exposure it's important, but it can be corrected with photography. You can paint from a photo and understand how it's exposed and kind of reduce that limitation. But form is something that you're never going to get from a photograph. You'll never kind of appreciate the 3D nature of an object unless it's in front of you. And there's a really good reason for that. So you have binocular vision. You have two eyes and they are a certain distance apart, and the fact that they can kind of cross-reference each other, and your brain can parse that information and figure out exactly how 3D something is really, really, really useful. It's really, really useful because when you're drawing shapes, those shapes are relating to 3D forms, even if they're 2D shapes. So seeing those 3D forms is going to help you make better decisions about what those shapes should be. It's also useful because I don't even have to keep my head in one place, right? If I'm looking at a subject, maybe they're wearing a particularly confusing piece of clothing, or I'm not quite sure what it is I'm looking at, I can move my head from side to side, and pretty quickly I'm going to get a better idea of what the form is that I'm drawing. If you're stuck with a photograph that has some kind of weird 2D graphic shape and you're not quite sure what it is, unless you have more photographs from the same scene from different angles, which would be nice, it's going to be difficult to pass that information and understand what you're looking at. A lot of the time, when I look at students that I teach that we do life drawing with, a big problem for them is that they just end up copying the 2D shapes that they can see in front of them and not relating them to the 3D forms. People who study purely from kind of reference on the internet actually begin to have an opposite problem, I find, which is where they're just seeing things in terms of 3D forms, maybe building things out of primitive shapes, but not relating that to these 2D optical shapes that tell us so much about the form. It can begin to make drawings look a bit stiff, a bit less organic than maybe they should be. So what we want to do is we want to meet those two in the middle, and I would argue that life drawing is the best way to do that. If you're trying to make mannequins of figures, maybe using the Loomis or the Riley method or Bridgman or anything like that, seeing the 3D human in front of you means that you can understand better how those body parts and limbs are oriented in 3D space, and how they relate to those really, really important 2D shapes that we see on the surface, right? And kind of getting those two to synthesize and line up, I've found in my own work has been the key to making things look kind of believably rendered while keeping very appealing brushmark decisions and that kind of thing, without things getting too stiff, too rigid. Now, the next thing I'd like to talk about is colour, and this is a pretty important one. So, if you've ever been outside, which hopefully you have, and you've seen a beautiful sunset or something, you've probably looked up in the sky in awe and been amazed at all these colours that are present in front of you. Kind of every colour of the rainbow is there. So you get out your phone and you take a photograph, and all of a sudden you have a grey mess, right? It's not reflecting the true nature of those colours. It's not giving you the vibrancy that maybe you want, and no amount of filters is going to get that vibrancy to look right. This is linked in a big way to exposure, because different colours have different chromas, and if you're exposing for different light levels, then those colours kind of live or die. It's difficult to get them all to harmonise at once. But really, colour is something that's really, really, really amazing. If you're looking at the skull right now, I can see these reflections of kind of warm browns and reds. I can see these yellowy olive greens in the eyes. And if I take a photo, again, the skull will just present itself as a boring grey. So I find that a lot of my paintings from life have much, much more interesting colour, but also much more realistic and grounded colours that harmonise with each other in a much nicer way. The other problem that I find when painting for reference is that your average student will grab reference from maybe Pinterest, and some maniac will have gone to town on Lightroom and just destroyed any of the original color that might have been in that image. Again, sunsets are famous for this. Someone's gonna like pump up the saturation, pump up the vibrance, color balance the whole thing, and you're not going to be appreciating the actual colors that might have been there. Now, if it's still a cool image, then maybe it's still worth studying. But I find that viewing things with your own eyes is much more satisfying, because you saw those colors, whereas a photograph might not have captured them in the same way. And again, it's a decision that you're making rather than letting a camera or a piece of software deciding what those colors should be. Now, let's switch off our artistic studying brains for a second, because I've been through how painting and drawing from life is going to help you with understanding form and value and colour in a kind of more holistic way, I suppose. But there are other benefits to life drawing as well, and one of those biggest ones that I really love is socializing. So a lot of the time we can feel a bit trapped behind our computer screens, and it's nice to organize with friends to go to that local museum, or to go to the park, or to go to a life drawing class or anything else, and actually communicate with other people, talk about what it is you're drawing. You'll each have a different approach to the same thing you're drawing. It's a nice excuse to get out and about. Art galleries are great, cafes are great, all that kind of thing. Drawing when you're on the go, capturing things that it might be a bit awkward to capture with a camera. So a lot of the life drawing I tend to do is on the train to work every day, and taking out a camera and photographing the people opposite me would be a little bit weird. Whereas I can sit there with my sketchbook and I can observe maybe, oh right, they have some quite interesting hair, maybe they've got a very interesting expression on their face, interesting clothes, that kind of thing. And I can observe the world around me in a way that means I actually remember more of the things I'm observing. So if you're studying from Pinterest, again, which I keep referring to, chances are you'll do a study of a crazy maybe East Asian costume or something, and then you'll forget it the next day. You won't retain that information. Whereas if you actually go out and see it with your own eyes, and you grab your sketchbook and you note it down, and maybe you write some notes about it, chances are that it's going to stick in your mind a bit more, because you're not just appreciating it as an image, you're appreciating it as an experience, and that helps it stick in your head. So give it a go. I'd like everyone who watches this video to try and do some life drawing. Again, it doesn't have to be a nude woman covered in blankets and on a nice couch. It can just be something that's around your desk, or better yet, go out into the world, right? Go to a cafe, or go to a museum, or just go out to your back garden, right, and observe the things that are around you in 3D space. Draw family members, pets, partners, anything like that. And you'll find that it's very, very enriching and fun in the end. It is more difficult, which I think is why people shy away from it. Initially, you might find that the results are worse, and that's because you can't rely as heavily on copying shape to shape. But your understanding of 3D form will be better. Your drawing will benefit from it. And at the end of the day, it's something that's a bit different if you haven't already done it. And I think a nice kind of relaxing break from being stuck in front of a glowing screen for God knows how long. So, yeah. Please do join the Discord. The link's going to be in the description. One of the clips I used in this video I did on stream. I'm going to link to that as well. And I'm thinking of opening up a Patreon where I'll be giving live crit and things like that. So watch out for that in the coming future. Have a great day, and yeah, try out some life drawing as soon as you can.